You've done worse.
Welcome back to the channel. Thanks a lot for tuning in. This is a very special one. I'm trying to answer a big question, and I could go on about this for hours, but I'm going to try and make this relatively concise. And I'm going to tackle the question with 3 different mediums. And what I'm answering is the question, why do I love science fiction? So I do love science fiction. It's been the mainstay of my entire life, and I got into it when I was very young. And it's just always been there. I absolutely love it for so many reasons. But I'm going to start this thing just by covering what it is, and also just going from a basic idea that even off the bat, regardless of the fiction that might come from this, science in itself is incredible. Okay, so science fiction. What is science fiction? There are people that would differ on definitions of science fiction, but broadly, most people would agree that certain things you would often find in science fiction. So you would often find visions of the future, explorations of how technology might change in the future, robotics, traveling to another planet, the possibility of aliens, first contact, maybe developments of intelligence. So it could be that, it could be some scientific experiment to change us in some way. So it could be something grounded on Earth, but it's about science interfering with us. It could be science interfering with our planet, so it could be an environmental disaster. It could be a post-apocalyptic thing. It could be like a pandemic. It could be climate change being looked at in some sort of futuristic way, or an alternative world. It could be overpopulation being looked at. Time travel is a very common trope, or subgenre, depending on how you want to look at it. There's this space opera stuff, which is usually a bigger scale, far more distant planets further away from Earth, and often spanning a big expanse of time as well. And there are some absolutely legendary examples of space opera. And the idea of dystopia is a science fiction subgenre as well, because that's looking at a future society that could be governments controlling the population in a particular way, or certain rules that have been put in place. And science fiction basically are all of those things and more, because obviously you can get comedic science fiction as well, and you can get science fiction horror. But the point is, all of those things bring you so many different possibilities for entertainment, for thought-provoking storytelling, for exploring human nature, and for just giving us a better understanding of humanity and possibly the potential for empathy. So it runs the gamut of fluffy, fun, entertaining science fiction to deeply thought-provoking, serious, dry science fiction. And somewhere in the middle, you'll have variations of both those extremes, and probably the cleverest and most noble science fiction would be science fiction that does both. So science itself is full of wonder. When we talk about why I love science fiction, I can't get away from the fact that I am deeply fascinated and in awe of the world around us, the universe around us, the stars and the planets, the way we work. So many elements of science is just an incredible thing. And I don't study science in an academic way. I don't think I'd be very good at that. But it still doesn't change the fact that it blows my mind, for example, that our sun is a star, and there are billions of stars out there, and some of them have planets around them, and some of those planets have the kind of atmosphere that could support life. I mean, that just blows my mind. and it always will do. And that, to me, is just incredibly fascinating and interesting. It just makes you think, when people talk about the insignificance of our existence, that we are this tiny speck in the universe. I don't see that as a negative thing. I think that's just that itself, that one statement is so wondrous. There's so much wonder in that, because you just think, well, what is out there then? What could be out there? So I do think that's really fascinating. And the way our brain works is really untapped as well. We're still discovering things about how our brain works, and that can be explored in science fiction. Anything like that, our bodies, our brains and biology. 3 Bs. So many different things that you could explore with that, about the ways that we work. I just think that's really, really endlessly fascinating. And our chemistry, the ways that our chemicals react to each other, and how that might play out with a different species on a different planet. I think that's really fascinating as well. Life is full of mysteries, and the way that you could explore other religions, or you could make comments about religion, or you could satire religion, if you like. There's so much that is unknown. And there was always has been. I mean, religion was built on us not understanding anything and needing to have these answers. So we just provide these answers with this storytelling, essentially. That's what religion is. And obviously, the more that science has helped us to understand what's around us and to understand life more, the more outlandish parts of religion has sort of whittled down, so it's a little bit less... not as many people believe that the world was created in 6 days, but centuries ago, more people would have believed that. So science does change our perception of our understanding of the big questions, and there's a general understanding that gets more sophisticated. Our understanding of the big questions gets more sophisticated as time goes on, and in 100 years, there'll be some things that we think now that people would laugh at in 100 years' time, because they would have got further in that investigation and that knowledge. So that, I think, is really fascinating as well. And you can explore that, the way, the whole idea of what the future is going to bring us, I think, is just incredible. All of those things make science fiction deeply fascinating and exciting and entertaining. As well as, I'm putting all this deep stuff in there, but obviously, just your basic fun, pulpy science fiction is awesome anyway. So just the idea of, your hero doing something heroic against some evil empire with some laser guns set on a spaceship in space, that's fun anyway. So, as I said, there's a whole spectrum of fun, fluffy science fiction and deeply, deeply thought-provoking and social referencing science fiction as well. I'm going to talk about 3 different mediums mainly. I'm going to start talking about TV, because that's how I discovered science fiction when I was a really young child. And then I'm going to talk about films, and then I've got a ton of books here that I was going to quickly just rattle through as great examples of what science fiction can offer. And then hopefully by the end of it, there's a good sense of why I love science fiction, why you could love science fiction, and if you're watching this because you love science fiction, hopefully you'll relate to some of this. So, TV. I've picked 4 series, and I'm going to start with my favourite all-time series. So, this isn't something I discovered when I was young, because this wasn't out when I was young. This is a 90s show, but I'm going to start with it because I just think there's so much that it offers, and it's my favourite show, so I'll start with that. So Farscape. I've done a video on Farscape already, but you've got your general kind of fluffy and adventure stuff as well, but it really does explore relationships really well. It also really explores the idea of alienation and the idea that John Crichton, the main character, is completely a fish out of water, and he's got to get used to these other species, but they keep encountering situations and alien species and planets that really make them have to adjust to that sense of alienation, and they have to have that they have to get rid of their prejudice, they have to listen to each other. They've got to deal with the fact that they've got this this barrier that they have to face, which would be that sort of alien world or alien people. It also beautifully talks about regret in it. It talks about obsession. There's lots of elements of distrust and trust in the narrative as well of the show. There's a found family at the centre of it that John Crichton becomes enmeshed with on the ship, on the living ship, Moya. So that found family is a really great, fascinating element to it as well. And also, sense of mortality. Mortality is discussed loads, partly because this impending big climactic plot that's running through it, but actually also because when characters die in it, and there's a really important death in season 3, there's consequences, and really big consequences sometimes. So that's explored really well. So these big themes are explored in a very fun show. It's a very funny show, and with lots of Jim Henson's creatures in it. So that's Farscape. Star Trek is the second show I wanted to talk about. So Star Trek has been around for a long, long time, as you probably know. Star Trek's been around a long time. And within Star Trek, the whole gamut of Star Trek, not just the original series, you've got all sorts of themes being explored in it. Lots of philosophical themes being explored. And that idea of what is life, what is the value of life, and when should life be valued? What is sentience? So when does life become sentient life, and how does that put value in that life? That's discussed a lot. The idea of tradition is discussed a lot in Next Generation with the Klingon stories that Ronald Moore wrote. And war, the effects of war, and the political aspects of war is discussed a lot in Deep Space Nine. And there's lots of again, like Farscape, there's lots of discussions in the show about alienation and that idea of other species having to be assimilated into another culture, or having to be tolerated or prejudiced, and having to adjust to working or living with other species. You know, that's done quite a lot in the Discovery series, well, especially after season 1. But certainly the last couple of series. I've missed the latest one because of streaming services. But that's a recurring theme in that. I mean, Saru has to deal with a lot of that, as well as some of the engineers that are on that show. So yeah, Star Trek explores loads and loads of themes, and it's a very deep show, and it's a very serious show actually. So Farscape is a very funny show. Star Trek doesn't get funny very often, and when it does try to get funny, it doesn't always work. But it's a very good show in general. All the different shows of Star Trek are very good kind of adventure shows, but with a lot of philosophy and thought-provoking ideas about society and how we function well, and different questions that come up. So that's Star Trek. Tales from the Loop. That was another one I wanted to mention. And with Tales from the Loop, which I've done a video on that before. It's a very short series. I don't know if there's going to be another season. It was only one season. I think it had 8 episodes in it, and it was on Amazon Prime. I thoroughly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. But that show explores identity, and it explores the idea of aging, and relationships are done really well in that, and expectations of a relationship, and the assumptions that can get made, and the idea of grass is always greener. It has horrible consequences in one episode when someone kind of really goes with that. Well, two of the episodes actually kind of explore that, and it's a very deep show with some great ideas, but again using science fiction scenarios to explore those ideas. And then one last one I was going to talk about before I go on to talk about films, and that's the series Humans. So Humans is an amazing series, I think. It's one of the best recent science fiction programs, and that's about how normal families and society at large deal with very human-looking robots, and the whole show explores the idea of, again, value of life and sentience in robots. And the first series is a fantastic scenario where the family unit is absolutely torn apart by the way that they all individually react to the one main android robot that's in their family. This female robot that is like an au pair for the children, and it just gets really complicated. So it just explores the relationships really well, as the idea of later on in the other series of the show. It's more about the rights that those androids want to get for themselves, and they start demanding. So it becomes kind of about their right to live properly. So I wanted to talk about films for a second. So films is probably the way most people interact with science fiction, I'd say. As far as different media goes, film is probably the one that is talked about the most and the most immediate one, because I think people who aren't into science fiction would probably still see science fiction films, whereas I think the TV shows are probably more seen by people who are into science fiction as a concept, as a setting. And that's certainly true with books. Obviously, it takes a lot more time to read books. So with films, Blade Runner. Blade Runner is one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, and it does deal with mortality, and it deals with, again, the rights of androids to have basic rights to live, and that's explored really well, and beautifully. There's that last speech, which was a new addition to the script at the time. But Blade Runner does tackle those big themes. Total Recall. Total Recall is another one from the 80s. That's a really interesting one because it's an action film, but actually the plot ends up riffing on capitalism and the exploitation of the people in Mars that are living on Mars, because it's manipulated the resources so that a big corporation can benefit from them and exploit the people that need it on Mars. So that is a very deep and complex and interesting way of looking at what could have been essentially a fun action film. So I think that's really, really interesting. So it's a big comment about corporate businesses and about the lack of sensitivity or empathy sometimes with the way that capitalism works. Interstellar. So Interstellar and 12 Monkeys deals with, both of those films deal with the environmental devastation that can come from our lack of care about climate change and the way that these things can just bring everything to a head. And for Interstellar, they send off these astronauts to try and find new life or a new planet that we can settle on, and that's the basis of the film. And what's also great is that the consequence of doing that means that the film has to deal with time dilation as well. The characters have to deal with the fact that they are leaving their families behind forever, because by the time they get back to Earth, they would have missed 50 years of their life, kind of thing. So lots of big themes explored there, and 12 Monkeys deals with the climate change thing through a terrorist attack that they have to stop by going back in time. But the terrorist attack does cause this big pandemic that creates an environmental change. So those are some of the big themes explored in those two films. Overpopulation is something that gets tackled in some films, most famously probably Logan's Run, with the device where the government has fooled the people into thinking there's this afterlife that's created by the carousel, but the afterlife doesn't exist. It's just killing off the people after a certain age, 30, I think it's when they get to 30, so that they can reduce the size of the population. You can't tackle overpopulation like that in anything but science fiction. And I just think it is the biggest problem we've got, or one of the big problems we've got in this world. The film Her which is probably not very often seen as science fiction, but it is science fiction because it is about the development of a more intelligent computer system that can arguably or potentially have a relationship with a real man, and a real man could fall in love with what is essentially just a voice, but a voice that comes from a computer that can grow to understand what the man really wants. So that, again, like all these other things with science fiction, it can explore other themes, like explore loneliness, the needs in a relationship, what a man might need when he is lonely to try and fulfill that gap, and the way that technology can sometimes fill that gap. And I think what the film does as well is explore whether that's a good or a bad thing. And, you know, it's beautifully done. It's an incredible film. But what's really interesting is that it's a science fiction concept at the centre of it. So, also, you've got the idea of the alien and the other being explored with films like Planet of the Apes and Enemy Mine. So I don't know if you've seen Enemy Mine. It doesn't get talked about enough, I don't think. It's a bit of an underrated film. But Enemy Mine has a great allegory about racism, because Dennis Quaid, a Earth astronaut, is forced to spend some time with this reptilian alien, and they have to kind of support each other and live with each other and try and help each other survive when they both had a lot of prejudice against the other species. And that's done really well. So Enemy Mine is a really good example of race being explored in science fiction. So let's rattle through some books, and I'll just do a quick summary of what these books explore as themes and why science fiction can offer these things. So just start off with my favourite book, probably, Flowers for Algernon. This is a great book which explores how tapping into intelligence and scientifically trying to improve intelligence can have all sorts of consequences that go well beyond people's expectations, and how our interaction with people around us and our own sense of ourselves is really built on our intelligence. So yeah, incredible book. So that's Flowers for Algernon. As I said, Soylent Green was based on a book. This is the book it was based on, Make Room, Make Room. And this book is a fantastic social commentary on overpopulation. And it's an undeniable classic. And it's such a big problem that it's great that science fiction quite often tackles that in its big themes. Stories of Your Life by Ted Chiang. This is a bunch of stories, but that particular story does have a great way of analysing, discussing, commenting on language, how we communicate with each other, and the mystery of getting to the heart of the truth through language. I mean, Ted Chiang's stories are always really deep and thought-provoking, but that's a really good example of that. If you want something a bit more literary, and you want an analysis of literature in other literature, and you want something that's got lots of multi-layers and lots of layers of points of view, then Hyperion is a good place to go. This is a nice chunky book which has 7 different points of view. I think it's 7 different stories that are written in first person, and it's someone telling their story. But they are all united in their journey to this one place to confront a threatening being that is potentially going to destroy them all. So there's a science fiction concept, but within that you've got these very complex stories told in different styles, different literature styles, from 7 very different characters. Children of Time really does take a very big concept, so billions of years and light years of space, as in physical space as well, and uses this huge expanse to look at the way society is built, the way religions develop, the way that wars can occur, the way that evolution occurs, and the way that a population can govern themselves and learn how to govern. It's big stuff. This has got so many big themes in it, and again, I mean, this is so thrillingly written as well. It's quite a fast pace, this one, even though it's quite big, but it's got so many big things in the book, big themes in the book. And again, another one that is a great kind of transition into modern thinking. Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness. So this one, just like The Female Man, is seminal in science fiction for starting that discussion about gender, and obviously gender now has been redefined again, and it's important to think about gender in as open a mind as you can, to start being a part of the discussion rather than just dismissing the discussion. And these are the kind of books that can help you get along that way, I think, because this was written way before that was part of the discussion. This is 1969, I think it came out, and what Le Guin's doing here is just getting you to think about, well, what makes a man a man? What makes a woman a woman? Does it matter if those gender roles change? What does it matter for society? What does it matter for norms? Does it fundamentally matter? So those are some of the things explored in that book. It's an amazing book with a very beautifully illustrated central relationship as well. Blindness by Saramago has a central conceit that everybody goes blind, and that general concept leads to absolute brutality. If you want to look for a book that will explore what humans are like when they are desperate, and when there's that potential for all empathy to go out the window and it becomes about selfish survival, then this is the book you might like. And it's just such a powerful book. It's quite brutal, and you do read it sometimes just thinking, oh my God, is there any hope for these people? But it's just amazing. So Blindness by Saramago does explore those themes about the more negative, nasty sides of our spirit, about the human condition. And this one here, Replay. So it's a time travel novel, and one of the best time travel novels, I think. And this one really explores what matters in our life, and about how we sometimes take the simple things for granted, and the things that just building up a family can actually be the core of what makes us happy. And the main character in this book realizes that's the case, but he does it through these tragic incidents where he loses those things because he has to keep repeating his life in this sort of time loop. And so the conceit within the book's narrative gives the character the chance to really think about those things, and it obviously gives the reader the chance to think about those things. So what is the meaning of life? What is the best things about life? What makes you happy? That's the sort of stuff that Replay thinks about. And then just a couple more. This one, Arrival, this is a graphic novel, and this is a graphic novel by Sean Tan. Sean Tan's books are just beautiful. They are so lovely. Look at that lovely picture. This is about an immigrant that has to go to another place to work, and it's about his alienation, basically, and his, he has to go, but he's so far removed from his own comfortable background and his own sense of identity. And it's a fantastic allegory about immigration, and those kind of things get explored so well in science fiction. So there we are. That is why science fiction is amazing, why I love science fiction, why so many of these different themes can be explored in science fiction so much better than other places. And after all, it's a setting. Do you know what I mean? It just means that these different trappings can be added to something that can be just exploring humanity and what we're like as people. So, yeah, hope that made a lot of sense and you could relate to that. if you've never read much science fiction before, it might have made you think, yeah, there's this whole world out there that I could read. Or if you have read lots of science fiction, hopefully you relate to some of what I've said. Thanks for watching. Bye.